So here we go. The recording is started. All right. I mentioned this once, and I'll say it again if you were away from your computer when I said it. If you have any questions that you're coming into this workshop with, I would love to know what they are now. And so if you want to drop them in the chat, or if you want to unmute and just verbalize it for a moment, I love knowing what questions are, because like I said, I'm planning for us to be together for 45 minutes, and I have about 8 hours of content. So I would love for you to help me choose what would be the most helpful for you all.
And I'd just like to know a little bit about, I know about like the seed grants and the monies available, but kind of how that jives with a timeline. Like, when would it be appropriate to ask for this kind of money or that kind of money?
We will definitely cover the grant timeline, Matt. Any other questions you all are coming in with?
Michael, I'm particularly interested in new worshiping communities in the wild. So eco-friendly new worshiping communities, communities that are worshiping outdoors or as often as possible outdoors. That type of conversation.
Okay. If I don't get to that naturally by the end, bring it back up again. It's not like in my slides, but I did write it down.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Anything else?
I would what I haven't seen a lot of is specific conversation around worship new worshiping communities in rural areas where there are not lots of places where people gather.
Yeah.
And for most of us, that's our context.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, okay. Great. Well, why don't we kind of start there, actually? And I'll give you the answer to the question, then we'll kind of go into more details about some things. My experience has been that in rural communities, what I've seen is that the process is similar, but tends to be longer in terms of the buildup. And that's okay, right? And so one particular rural community, it's actually a different context than I was thinking of before, but it's the same example. The high school football game was one of the places they saw as like, this is where we are every week together. And so they really made a point of being there, right? You're right that like, there are fewer like third spaces where you're going to go on a regular basis and see a lot of the same people, and because we're all more spread out when we live in those environments, and that makes sense. Yeah. So it tends to move slower, and then also I think what I've seen is, once the vision for something is discerned and it starts to get established in rural communities, it also kind of has a longer staying power too. And so it's longer on both ends of the journey, is what I've observed and learned from the folks who have done it. Yeah. So I want to just think about, first with y'all, what it is we do when we get started, to start anything new, whether it becomes a new worshiping community or whether it's any other form of ministry or mission that is going to exist that does not yet exist, right? And I wanted to do that first by sharing a couple of examples with you. First, a couple of negative examples that I've had, and I'm changing some of the details here just to make this a little bit more anonymous. I very regularly get contacted by pastors and other church leaders who are looking to apply for a grant from us. Because they have an idea. And one time I was contacted, and this was a pastor who was a little bit older, and he was pastoring two churches that were small and declining in membership, and they merged. And now, because of the merger, they had one building that was unoccupied, and they were trying to decide, do we sell it or do we do something else with it? And the pastor had an idea that he thought, I and the church really want to reach young people. And so he contacted me and he said, I know that young people love hanging out in coffee shops. And they love yoga. I love yoga. I would love to teach yoga. So we want to get a grant so that we can turn this one church building into a coffee shop where there can be yoga classes so that we can reach young people. And I said, okay. We have new worshiping communities that are flourishing that revolve around opening a coffee shop, and we have worshiping communities that are flourishing around yoga classes. But with him, I asked the question, tell me about the young people you've talked to and met who have indicated to you that they want to come to your coffee shop, or who trust you enough to learn yoga from you, right? And his response was, well, I don't know any yet because I need the money from you to build the coffee shop so that I can meet the young people. They did not get a grant from us, really. Another example, person in other part of the country, and she wanted to get a grant from us to start a new worshiping community. And she said, that she lives in a neighborhood that was affected by poverty and that there was a lot of food insecurity there. And she had read about dinner churches, these new worshiping communities that gather around a meal, which again, we have lots of those in our movement. And so she said, I would love to get a grant from you so that I can host a dinner church at my house. And I said, that's a nice idea. Tell me about your neighbors whom you've gotten to know, who trust you enough that they will come to your house if you invite them. And she said, well, I haven't met any of them yet. I need the money from you to buy the food, to have the dinner, to meet them. And this goes back to breaking the stained glass barrier. But incidentally, in the first story I shared, that particular pastor was very theologically progressive by the standards of our denomination. The person who wanted to start the dinner church was a little bit more conservative by the standards of our denomination. And so this is an issue I see just in our churches that has little to do with the particular theological place we fall in our spectrums. But we just kind of have this assumption that if we're going to get to know our neighbors, we need to be the ones in control of the thing that's happening, right? That we need to be the ones who have the resources that are being shared, that we have the thing that's being offered to others. And that if we don't have those resources, or if we don't have that thing to offer, then all hope is lost for meeting our neighbors. I will say, the communities that get started with those assumptions at play don't go well. There's often a lot of struggle. As opposed to the communities where instead of having something to offer, we just go and get to know our neighbors in humility, knowing that God is already at work among them, knowing that just as we do come in with what we have to offer, God has given us things and we should use them and steward them. Please don't mishear me. But also recognizing that our neighbors are blessed by God and have something to offer us too, whether it's something tangible or intangible. And so the most sustainable and the best new worshiping community ideas, the ones that really flourish, tend not to begin with an idea that happens with a pastor sitting in their study. They tend not to happen around a board meeting table where a session is meeting, but rather they actually happen in the context of building relationships and getting to know the neighbors around you. And there's a process, an exercise that we encourage folks to do this, and we call it neighborhood exegesis. Now, for those of you who are pastors or who have gone to seminary, I'll make this a little bit bigger if it's helpful. For those who are pastors if you've gone to seminary, you're familiar with the concept of exegesis as this thing we do to study a text of scripture, to go from what the text is saying to how it's speaking to us today and what it might be inviting us to do. And in very broad brushstrokes, when we exegete scripture, we tend to do three things. We observe the text, we interpret it, and then we apply it to our lives. And so we can go through these same 3 steps to understand how God is at work in a neighborhood or in a community. And so we can begin by just exploring our neighborhood and making good observations. If we were doing this together in person, we would actually do this exercise together, where we would actually step out of whatever building, church we were in, and take a walk or a drive in the community to see what we could see, and then come back and talk together about what we observed. And so there's a list here. I will say that you can go on our website, 1001.org, and find our discernment guide on there. And I'll even send a follow-up email maybe through Matt, so that you can, with a direct link to it. But it has this kind of in curriculum form so that you can see it together, and not just rely on my slides. But to think about what it is you see, what it is you hear. Just to give some examples, when I've done this exercise with folks and we've walked neighborhoods, in one neighborhood where we were, someone looked at the cars and they noticed that every single license plate was from a different state than the state we were actually in. Well, that says something about who lives there, right? And maybe even how long they're going to be there. In another neighborhood where we were doing this, we were walking, and at first we noticed that all of the houses were really big and expensive looking. But then we looked closer and we realized that every one of those big houses had multiple electrical boxes on the outside, indicating that the big houses had been divided up into smaller apartments, right? And so our first observation about who we thought might live there was different than our second one, once we realized that actually these are people living in small apartments, not in big houses, right? So, and I will say, even in places where people are doing this exercise and they've lived there all their lives, they will notice things when they're invited to look at it with fresh eyes that they don't notice when they walk it every day. Now, just for you all to be thinking about this yourself, think about the neighborhood you live in. And I'm going to invite you actually even to share in the chat right now, as you imagine walking down your street or driving down your street. What is it that you might observe? What is most noticeable to you? And feel free to share it in the chat. Lots of dogs, yeah. I noticed that yesterday when I was walking in my neighborhood, just how many folks were out walking their dogs, especially at certain hours of the day. Yeah. Children out playing, dog walking. Something I noticed in my neighborhood when I've walked it recently is just how big of a discrepancy there is. And it was very little middle ground of houses that look really well manicured and cared for and houses that are really neglected or appear neglected. And so it makes me think about the mix of folks who currently are living in my neighborhood and how that might even be shifting and changing. Dollar General is busy across the street, near a migrant camp down the road. Small storefronts that are gone, they're empty, yeah. So even in that, we can even pick up on the history of a place, right? And what was there that is not there now, or vice versa. Yeah, great. So these are all just beginning points, right? These are just the things that we see, that we notice. We can even also observe and make notice of how we feel inside as we think about these things and what our own visceral reactions are. And recognizing that our visceral reactions are helpful to a degree, but also limited, right? Because we also carry biases and we need to be aware of those as well. When we do this exercise, we tell people to first take a walk and make these kinds of observations. And then we encourage people to find a place where they could have a conversation with somebody. Now, depending on the neighborhood, and again, this gets to differences between more urban environments versus rural environments, having a conversation with somebody can be something that we can walk into and just do spontaneously, or it can be something that we actually plan in advance and try to schedule a meeting with somebody. And there is wisdom to be found in the kinds of folks who we might schedule a meeting with, elected officials, high school principals, business owners, folks like that, neighbors even, and the folks we might just happen across because they're around, right? But we encourage folks to have a conversation with somebody about how they experience life in the neighborhood. And we always caveat it by saying that the goal is never to have a spiritual conversation. Because in fact, if you bring up spiritual things with people too quickly, it actually can put up a barrier to sharing openly. And so we tell folks, just be curious with them about how they experience life in the neighborhood. And I cannot tell you how many times I have those conversations and people are actually excited to talk with a stranger about how they experience life in their neighborhood. The very first time I was led in doing this exercise, we were put in partnerships, and my partner was, I think, a little too zealous to do this exercise, and frankly misunderstood the assignment, because she would go up to folks and she would say, "Hey, we're part of this church group and we're getting to know strangers. Can we talk with you for a little while and ask you some questions?" And every single person she would approach and say that to responded the same way. They said, I gotta go soon. I'm sorry, I can't talk to you today, right? And again, I do not recommend this method, but her next thing that she said was, well, how much time do you have? And they would inevitably say, again, I do not recommend that. I'm glad I'm seeing head shaking and people laughing at that. And every single person would say something along the lines of 5 minutes or thereabouts, right? And she would say, well, do you mind if we just take that and then we'll let you go? Again, do not recommend that. Please do not take that as how you should start a conversation. But then she actually would do the assignment and actually did just start asking questions to the other person. And every single time it went the same way, which was the 5 minutes or however long they said they had would go by. And she would say, it's been 5 minutes, I know you have to go. And every single one of them said, actually, that was a lie. But I was expecting this to be something very different. And I'm actually enjoying this. I would actually like to keep having the conversation. And so I have learned that even when we come in just wanting to hear from somebody else, if we hold on to our curiosity, a listening ear and curiosity is really a gift to other people. And so you can see some of the questions that we encourage folks to ask. And again, you would have to adapt these for your context and how long you've lived in a place and how well you know the person. Some of my favorites are to ask people what makes them most proud of their community and what they wish was different. We can learn a lot just from that. So again, learning to ask these kinds of questions can teach you a lot. And the more people you talk to over time, the bigger and better the picture of the neighborhood is that you will get, and you will learn things. Again, every time I've done this exercise, and even in places with folks who've lived there all their lives, they learn something new because they talk to someone that they've never known before in their neighborhood. So I wanted to ask you all, again, feel free to share these reflections in the chat. Think about your own neighbors, and define neighbor however you like. And what are some of the things you're learning from them Seniors living alone, feeling isolated. Yeah. Yeah. The neighbors across the street watching for our packages. That's a gift. Well, depending on what happens after they see the package, I guess, but I suspect it's a gift. Yeah, the children of the church-going families don't go to church. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm hearing from some of my neighbors and friends just how tired they are. Even after 3 years of the beginning of the pandemic, some of my neighbors are just very tired still of all the things they're having to juggle in the wake of it. Yeah, folks will step in to help, absolutely. Yeah. Something else I will say, and again, I don't recommend starting with spiritual conversations if it's someone you're speaking with for the first time or early on in getting to know them. But I've noticed that a lot of folks who aren't interested in church, or maybe who have had experiences in church that were particularly negative or traumatic, there's still a strong interest in Jesus. There's still a lot of love for Jesus. And I've seen and I've noticed that a lot too. Right. So as we make these observations, as we talk to folks, we can move from observation into interpretation. We can begin to reflect theologically on what we're experiencing. And so whenever we do this exercise in person, the questions we ask are simple. We ask, where did we see evidence of God at work in that place? And we ask, where did we see evidence of either brokenness? We could say sin. Sometimes we'll even say lament. Where did we see a longing for things to be different? If we talk even longer, we might even get into what are some stories in the Bible that come to mind as we think about all that we experienced in this place? And we begin to think about just how God's at work. And then out of that reflection is where these new possibilities for ministry, for new communities, for new expressions of church can come about. And so that's the process. And we do these little experiments. We don't come up with a full plan that we expect to last for years on end. Rather, we just try some simple things, right? I know, just to give one example, there's a church here in Pittsburgh, and this is not even a new worshiping community story. It's just a church engaging their neighbors in a healthy way. First Presbyterian Church of downtown Pittsburgh. When the Pittsburgh Marathon over a decade ago now restarted, the church didn't plan for it well the first time it happened. And so they didn't realize that the marathon route was going to get into the way of all the people coming to church, driving and finding parking in the morning and being able to even cross the marathon route to get from the parking to the building. And so the worship service that year started, I forget exactly how late it was. I want to say it was close to an hour late because it took that long for everybody to get there. And the pastor, who's a friend of mine and a friend of, I think, Doug's as well, Tom stood before the congregation, apologized for the inconvenience, and then said, but next year, we're going to be out on the marathon course handing out water. And they did that. And then they took it a step further the next year. And they said, what if we had a blessing of the runners? In the same way that some churches have blessings of animals, blessings of bikes, all kinds of other things. Why don't we bless the running shoes, bless the runners? And so they tried it, and they planned a prayer service for like 6:30 in the morning or something like that before the marathon began. I attended it because I was going to run the marathon that year, and about a dozen people maybe showed up. Out of, I forget how many thousands, I think 10,000 runners, right? So not exactly what we would call a success, but again, they were making good observations. They noticed that a lot more people were going in to use the bathrooms at the church because there weren't enough porta-johns outside, right? And so they were starting to notice those kinds of things. So the next year, Tom, the pastor, decided, well, we aren't going to have a service, but what we will do is we'll open the doors for people to use the bathroom, and we'll be outside with signs saying free prayer. And they prayed over a lot of people that way, because even though people weren't going into the sanctuary, they were still walking down the street looking for the starting line. And then during the race, they were handing out water. Tom, the pastor, was preaching with a microphone as people were running by during the race. And he was just like over and over again reading things like Isaiah 40, you'll run and not grow weary, you'll walk and not grow faint, right? So, but over time, because this church was kept observing what was happening around them, and rather than seeing it as a hindrance to what they were already trying to do, they kept adapting and trying new things in light of what they were observing and learning from that one day that life was different in their community. All right. Any questions about that?
I'm kind of wondering why the Pittsburgh church didn't provide a high protein breakfast of some kind that the runners could take with them or consume quickly before they go and give them energy.
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to it. It's a great idea. So maybe they. And
I was waiting for you to say that's what they did, and you never said it. I'm like, oh.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't remember them ever providing food. I don't know if it's because they just never thought of the idea, or if they just didn't have quite the resources to be able to do that. Who knows? But yeah, it's a great idea too. Yeah. Yeah, so that's the first thing I want to share with you all is get to know your neighbors, to show up wherever they are, right? Learn from them, ask good open-ended questions. And again, this exercise of just walking a neighborhood, we do this as just like sometimes an hour-long exercise. And we'll say, go take a walk, see what you can see, and then find a place, if it's possible. Again, this is not possible necessarily in every type of community. If there's a place where you can kind of appropriately loiter, spend some time there. And that can be a business, or it can be a park, or you can do it intentionally. I mean, we talked about the high school football game as an example lots of times. Do this exercise, and as a church, go to the high school football game and make it the goal or the challenge for everyone in the church to talk to one person with curiosity and see what they learn, right? You can do this around the rhythms of your neighborhood and community. And then come back together and talk about what you've learned. I've done this in different kinds of events, but also like whenever I was pastoring a church, we included this exercise in our new members class. We included it in Sunday school classes. We included it in staff meetings and session meetings. Doing this can change the orientation and the perspective of your church if you do it consistently. Right. What I would love to do next is actually show you a case study of a new worshiping community. And I'm going to invite you just to observe back and reflect back what it is you see. And so this is a video of one new worshiping community and it's specifically of an elder in the church who made some observations about what was happening outside of the church. Sorry, I have several files open, so it's just taking me a moment to get everything situated here. Okay. Are you all now seeing the, oh no, you're not yet. Okay.
Here we go.
You're seeing the video screen now? Okay, here we go.
We don't have any volume.
Oh. Can you hear me?
I cannot hear anything.
Did you share volume from the app when you?
I thought I did, but let me stop sharing and resharing and seeing if that fixes it. And if not, then we'll do something else. Yeah, it says optimized for video clip. Let's try it with media from here. Let's see if this works better. Okay, you're all seeing it again, yes?
Mhm.
Okay. Tell me if you can hear it now.
Yep, we got it.
Great, okay.
You know, if you walk down Broadway, you can count almost a church on every block. And yet look around at what this neighborhood looks like. How can we have so many places that say they're worshiping God and this community look the way it looks? And so you hunger and you hope to find lay people who have that heart for growing the kingdom and giving their all to God. And so when I met Diane, I said, oh my Lord, okay, God, I get it.
You know, a heroin addict may not be so interested in food every week at a particular time. They're more interested in making sure they get their dope. And so in the interim, if they're not high, then they come by here. It just depends on the situation. Some of the working girls out there, if they have men with them, if the men allow them to eat, they'll come in and eat. Other than that, and usually that's predicated on whether or not the man is hungry. And then they'll come in together, they'll have a little something to eat, and they go back out. So I'm on my way to Princeton, as a matter of fact, when I was going to the first workshop I had gone to for 1001 New Worshiping Community. And I'm riding and I'm saying, God, I'm so tired of living in Patterson. I don't want to live here. See, the streets are dirty, the people are impoverished. You know, I want to go somewhere else that's more affluent. So that was, I'm praying and talking to God on the way down. And all I could see were the faces of women who were walking down these streets, prostituting themselves. I can see the young men coming out of the liquor store, and I'm going, oh my God, these are the people that God has given me a heart for.
This effort, Wings in a Prayer, Faith Works is trying to say is there is a future for you. God has a future for you, and we want to be God's hands and feet and help you see that you are loved.
Churches, wherever people are gathered in the name of God, and wherever the word of God is where the sanctuary is. So for us, the sanctuary can be on the corner of the street, it could be in the laundromat, it's wherever there are people. And when we come, we come for the purpose of meeting people where they are, touching people, interacting with them, and building relationships. And so that's our church. And when we realized people were not going to come here for whatever it is we had, no matter how wonderful it was, then the Holy Spirit said, well, get out of the box. Dear Heavenly Father, this is your son, Murphy, Lord. This is your beloved. This is your own lot, Lord. The one who you designed and knitted in his mother's womb. Church people aren't welcomed out there. Church people are not revered out there. Church people are seen sometimes as demons out there because church people look down. Church people ignore. Church people drive by on Sunday in their wonderful cars and their fine clothes, and they don't even look folks in the eye.
What we've seen is that they say, wow, you people are for real. You know, you people really care. And so there's more of a friendly, less hostile attitude. And as a matter of fact, members of other churches are joining them. So now it's ecumenical. You know, Pentecostals, some Baptists. It's like, right, because we're trying to grow the kingdom, not our own little piece of it.
They pray for you, and that makes you feel good. And then they feed you, and that makes you feel good too.
It's people coming together, seeing each other every week. They know each other from the street. It's a community, and that's what we're trying to achieve here. We're trying to have community. Sometimes when we're alone, we think we have nothing to live for. Oh, but God, we have everything to live for. There's things that you have for him to do, work you have.
It's mind-boggling, it's miraculous, it's wonderful. It's what church is supposed to be. And so now people are coming from Wings and a Prayer to the 9:30 worship service because they're developing spiritual community amongst each other. It's about freeing up the spirit in people that's already there. And, that's the blessing of this ministry.
When we do go out, it's just something magical when we can help reconnect people with the God of their youth, with the God when they were living a different type of life. God was calling me to do something more, and he also had given me the ability to look into the faces of these people and see something more than what I had seen before. Not only was I called, but I knew who I was called to help. And so for me, it's a mission. I'm on a mission from God, like the Blues Brothers. Only without the shades.
All right. So I would love to know what is you observed about that, or what questions that video or that story raised up for you.
One of the things that I see is a church that's not really all that focused on Sunday morning. And
Yeah.
I would be interested to see their staffing structure and see if that mimics that as well.
Yeah, and I don't know the answer fully to that, I will say. Yeah.
While I was watching that, I was seeing in my mind's eye the exact same thing possible to happen in and around the area of Collingwood Boulevard in Toledo and the Old West End.
Mm.
Because the Old West End is just ripe for that kind of development and that kind of outreach.
Yeah.
That could be a thing, a Presbytery-wide focus right there.
I hear that, Lance. I hear that.
Yeah.
I think too, it's important as a teaching elder, identifying and naming the gifts that our folks have, and calling them out and providing them with access to the resources like 1,001 worshiping communities, and recognizing that it's not often going to be us, but it's going to be the folks in our community who are going to begin these new communities.
That's right. I will say, I pretty regularly will be contacted by a presbytery or a church, and they'll be saying, we want to start this new worshiping community wherever. Do you have anyone to send us who could lead it for us?
Mm-hmm.
And most of the time, if they're asking that question, they usually don't like my answer, which is, honestly, it's more likely that that the person who's going to lead it is someone who lives there already and is not yet Presbyterian, than someone who's Presbyterian and seminary educated and not yet living there.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Michael, you might have said this already. I apologize if you did, but did you just out where the leadership or when the leadership classes are, where the leadership classes are? Because what I loved about that when the pastor suggested that this person go to a leadership training.
Yes.
And she went to the leadership training and then she came back and launched the ministry. I mean, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And, because I don't know how many times, and Jesse, you probably know this too. I mean, I get people will say, what we should do blah, blah, blah. And what that really I hear that generally meaning you should do blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And that example was, that's fantastic. And you know what, you'd be perfect to do this. And we can support you in this leadership training to go and get equipped to come back and launch this ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And then to have the person go, yes, let me do that. He's like, what?
Yeah, that's a great segue into talking about some of the resources we offer from 1001.
Yeah.
So I'd love to chat about that. So in broad brushstrokes, we have resources kinds of in these buckets. We have leadership assessments, which are great for folks discerning a call. And I'll share more about all these in more detail. We have some training events that happen on a regular basis. We have funding. We have cohorts for folks because we realize that a lot of times folks who are doing this kind of work, they really need to be, in relationship with folks who are doing similar things, even if it's in another other part of the country, as opposed to folks doing traditional ministry who are near them. And then we have a lot of other kind of print resources, and then also we have a coaching network. So let me talk, because you asked about the trainings and things like that. Let me start with that. So we have assessments that are for folks who are discerning this call or in the early stages of starting something. And it's to help them discern and determine, one, is starting something new and start being the point leader of a new ministry or new missional community. Is that right for me? Is it a good fit for me? But
Michael,
then also,
zoom that for us, please.
I'm sorry?
You zoom that slide for us, please.
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
So it's that, and it's also asking the question of, how do I need to grow in order to really flourish in doing this? And so, because we know that entrepreneurs will throw themselves into doing something and neglect their own personal and professional growth, and it can really hurt the community. And so we offer these different kinds of assessments. We have what we call the Missional Leadership Quiz. This is an online assessment. You can go to 1001.org and find it there. It's a simple quiz. We developed it with Presbyterian Research Services. It's not rocket science to know what the quote unquote right answers are. But if you take it honestly, it will give you some honest feedback about where you might need to grow in order to really flourish as a new church or a new ministry starter. We have an event called Exploring Missional Leadership. It's a one-day event that a presbytery can host. It's a day-long thing. So it's ideal for anyone who's involved in this kind of work, whether it's folks who are going to be kind of on the leadership team starting a new worshiping community, or folks in a presbytery like you all who want to nourish this kind of work. I provide this one-day event for free to any presbytery that wants to host it. And so I'm happy to talk with you all. Matt, happy to talk with you more after this to talk about exploring missional leadership to Maumee Valley Presbytery. And then we have this 4-day-long assessment called Discerning Missional Leadership. We offer it 4 times a year. We're going to be offering it in May in Pittsburgh and also online in June. And then a few more times in other parts of the country in the latter half of the year. And that's more of an investment in time and money for the potential leader. But that's the event that Diane mentions in the video that she attended at Princeton. So that event for folks, especially who really are called by God to start something new, but have no credentialing from the denomination or from the church, that is a great place to really feel empowered to do this kind of work. So that's one piece of this. The other piece is the training, which is more of the
wait, Michael, before you go on to the training, could you just say, so, I mean, I really feel like pretty strongly there are 10 people on the call right now who would benefit from that one-day missional leadership. And you already kind of talked about how we'd get that started. If and I think there's 2 or 3 people that really belong in that 4-day discernment. What would be the mechanism? Would they contact you directly?
Yeah, so on 1001.org, you can click on the assessments page. It's on the right side, kind of among a list of tabs you can hit. And it has the information for when we're offering it and also the registration links.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Cool. So our main training is called Accelerator. Because of some funding we got, this training, we're able to offer it completely for free. And so it is, again, also a 4-day-long training. If you do it in person, the only thing you need to pay if you do this training is your travel costs to get there. We provide the lodging, the food, and the actual content for free. We'll be offering it later this year in May in Pittsburgh. And then we'll also be offering it in Denver later in the year. In addition to the in-person versions, we have an online version of it as well, where you can work more on your own pace and go through some video content, and then have some scheduled times with a cohort of folks who are going through that the online content, so that you can check in with them and kind of be in a learning community online. But it's a little bit more flexible if getting away for 4 days is challenging. Again, we're able to offer this completely for free, so we really encourage folks to take advantage of it.
And by listing Sean's name at the bottom, he's the one who's the contact on that?
You know, I'm glad you asked that, because I realized I have not updated this slide since Sean resigned in last month. So
What?
yeah, so I'm going to put my email in the chat, and you can contact me if you're interested in that, and we'll get you hooked up. So I just dropped my email in the chat. Feel free to reach out to me if you're interested in the accelerator. The last thing I wanted to chat about, because Matt specifically asked about it, is the grants. So we have 3 levels of grants. I'm going to talk the most about the first one, because that's the first one where you would get started. It's called a seed grant. It is a $10,000 grant. The requirements for it, it's meant to be a low bar. We ask that you demonstrate that whatever project, whatever thing you're starting, meets the definition, or even just potentially meets the definition of a new worshiping community. The application spells out what that definition is. Basically, we define those words, new and worshiping and community. And I will say, you know, because of the juncture we're at as a church in the time that we live in, kind of post-COVID, and all that we're learning about just how much change we need to go through as a church, the committee that approves these grants is really leaning and erring on the side of, let's give them $10,000 and see what happens in a year. So my experience has been lately that people are waiting longer to apply for this grant than they need to. It's really meant to fund an idea and fund possibilities, more so than to fund something that's already in place and already perfected. So again, you can find the application on find it on 1001.org. And again, if you can't find it on there, feel free to email me and I'll help you find it. But to get that grant, you just need to demonstrate in writing how the idea potentially meets the definition of a new worshiping community. The most important thing is, are you reaching new people, or are you attempting to reach new people? That's the thing that they look for more than anything else. You need to be able to name your benchmarks for success, because we know every community has a different context. And so it would be unreasonable for us to have the same benchmarks for every new worshiping community. So we ask you to name what they are. If you do apply for future grants, we do ask you to refer back to these benchmarks and tell us how you did. So, you know, keep that in mind. And we expect your presbytery to have a relationship with it as well. And at the seed grant level, at the very least, we just expect the presbytery to say, we know this is happening and we're behind it. We don't necessarily expect a whole lot of investment from the presbytery at this level. As things progress, there's 2 additional grants after that that are each $30,000. The investment grant you can apply for 12 months after you receive that seed grant. You can apply for the growth grant 18 months after the investment grant. Both of them are $30,000. They are matching grants, which means you have to raise $30,000 elsewhere in order to get the full $30,000 from us. That can come from giving within the participants of that community. It can come from partner churches. It can come from your presbytery, from your synod. It can come from gifts in kind. If a church is providing a new worshiping community with space to meet in, free of charge, the fair market rental value of that space can count toward the matching grant. So getting to $30,000 does not take long. To get that investment grant and that growth grant, you also have to go through some of those programs we've talked about already, the discerning missional leadership assessment, the accelerator training. We also do expect you to go through our discernment guide, which we have available online. Again, you can find it on 1001.org. It includes the neighborhood exegesis exercise we already talked about, and some other exercises that we believe are important to discern a call and discern a vision for a new worshiping community. The grant applications at the investment grant and growth grant level are based on that discernment guide. So if you take good notes while you go through that discernment guide, you will have written your grants. So take good notes when you do them. I'm going to pause there if you have any questions about this, because I realize we're also at time.
Well, your one little line there at the bottom is a little deceiving. The Board of Pensions grant. I mean, that's huge, right? Because for an organizing pastor, they will cover pastor's participation for the first 3 years, 100%. And then the 4th and 5th year, there's discounted rates. So you're getting an organizing pastor and evangelist for serious subsidized kind of rates.
Yes. And go ahead. Does someone else have a question?
Well, I was going to say that is great. And to put that explicitly, because I've looked at this like a gazillion times over the past 10 years, but as, you know, a pastor with a family and the breadwinner, like, come on, how the heck do you, so that's why I think it's more of a bottom up, like it's folks that are sitting in the pews and we're facilitating those leaders. But I'm wondering if there is a place for ministers of Word and Sacrament who do feel called to evangelism on a full level scale, and where do we fit in?
That's a great question. And I wish I had like a one-stop shop answer for it.
Right.
But it really does vary presbytery by presbytery. Because that job code of organizing pastor evangelist is by definition, it's a presbytery call. And so that is historically where that ministry and that role has fit.
Okay.
And we realize that, you know, our grants cannot cover that salary, right, by itself. It can be used for that by all means. Like we expect this grant to at least cover some salary for the leader or for the person doing the work. But it also, I mean, doing this work involves the work of fundraising and finding other funding sources.
Right. So are we going to fund that, Matt?
I'd like to fund 20 of them.
So moved.
Well, if we had church buy-in, it would not be hard, right? If churches were willing to say, hey, we're going to give $10,000 to this a year. All right, well, now we can do 5 or 6 of them next year, you know.
But I thought you were missing the point in what all this was, that it doesn't come from presbytery. It comes from neighborhood walking around. It's much more organic than that. It's nice for us to say, you know, we can help support. But what I heard, correct me if I'm wrong, was that this starts with an organic, not necessarily someone who's a member of our presbytery or knows what presbytery is.
Thank you for raising that, Carol. I'll close with a couple of stories that I think address that. So, you know, I come from Pittsburgh Presbytery, and Pittsburgh has been one of the presbyteries that has started more new worshiping communities than the typical presbytery. And that really started before 1001 was a thing. It started in the late 90s when a pastor stood on the floor of presbytery during one of our stated meetings and challenged the presbytery to relearn and to recommit itself to starting new churches. At that point, Pittsburgh Presbytery had gone 20 years, I think, since it had started its last new church. And so no one remembered how to do it. They brought in consultants, and every consultant said the same thing, which was buy a big piece of property in a growing suburb and build a building and hire 3 staff, 1 preacher, 1 evangelist, and 1 professional musician, and start your new worship service. And in that growing suburb, people are going to come to it because just like they need new schools and new pharmacies and grocery stores, they're going to need a new church too. And not surprisingly, that did not work. And in Pittsburgh, there was exactly one suburb that met that criteria. And that model didn't work there either. And so the commission that had been organized by the Presbytery to spearhead this work of starting new churches, they made the move of having their meetings on Mount Washington, the highest point in the city, and they just prayed over the city for their meetings because they didn't know what else to do. And then all of a sudden, word got out, and they were contacted by two folks who said, "Hey, we heard you're interested in starting new churches. We're Methodist, and we want to start this new thing on the south side of Pittsburgh." And the commission heard them and joined them in this work that was starting in the neighborhood of Pittsburgh that had all the nightlife. It started with a Bible study in a tattoo parlor. And the Presbytery honored what God was doing among folks who were not part of the Presbytery, but gave form and structure and support to it to help it happen. And so again, it started though with the members of this commission just committing to pray together. Another Presbytery that really went from 0 to 60 in this work is Heartland Presbytery, which is Kansas City. They committed to just doing neighborhood exegesis. They had a once a month happy hour for folks interested in this kind of work. They met in a different place and they did neighborhood exegesis together, and then they hung out in a bar and talked about their ideas. So again, just another example of, yes, it starts at the grassroots. However, the Presbytery can affirm those practices and honor what they see God doing. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you, Michael, for coming and illuminating us and getting us started with some of this stuff.
It's
Is our time at a close?
I think so. We are 12 minutes past what I was planning to go. So I appreciate you bearing with me and all the good questions you all asked as well.
Hopefully this isn't the last that you hear of us.
I hope that's the case.
All right. Well, I will close us. Let us close with prayer. God, we give you thanks for Michael and his spirit, and for the Spirit moving amongst us, for looking for church outside the walls and equipping our hearts and our minds for the difficult work ahead. Let us walk where you walked, and pray where you prayed, sing where you sang, and rejoice with you in the beyond. Through Christ we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. It was my pleasure to talk to you all soon. Send me grant applications. We want to give away that money.